Hello, and welcome back to our series on learning Google Apps Script for HR, brought to you by Prairie-HR-Solutions, where we believe knowledge should be shared, and in empowering our fellow HR professionals and really rethinking how we deliver our HR services and solutions by using tools that we probably already have at our disposal. My name is Jake Finger, Principal Consultant here at Prairie-HR-Solutions, and in this video, I want to build out our final function. And let's load our sidebar up here. And where we left off was we created a function to create a record, to retrieve a record, and to update a record. Currently, our delete record, when we hit process, it's simply going to give us this alert delete function coming soon. So what we want to do is we want to build out this function. And what we want this function to do, remember, we always want to think operationally when we're constructing functions as essentially what is occurring at what point in time. What we're wanting this delete function to do is to grab whatever value is in this cell, say it's, 34, and we want to go through and find that row, find that employee data. So it's similar to our retrieve. We want to find that data, and then we want to grab this row. And we're not really going to delete it. Maybe we should change delete record to archive. And we want to grab this row, and then instead of updating this row, we're not going to update it. We're going to just simply archive it. And when we archive a record, if you remember our script here, my script closed. Let's see. Let me reopen this. If you remember our script here for our update record, it did a lot of the same exact steps that we're needing to do. It went through and it's actually going through, it's grabbing, isolating the row by the index, and then it's archiving it, that row, and then it's rewriting the data. It's setting the value of the new data. So instead of setting the values, what we want to do is simply delete the row. So we can use a lot of our same language and function content here on not only this code side, but also our HTML side. I want to take just a quick second and really drill into this +2, which is adjusting for our header row and zero-based index. So what this is actually doing is when we go back to our sheet, if we wanted to get this initial cell and we're in a sheet, what we would do is go down to the second row, because remember our first row is the header. So we need to add 1 to get to that appropriate row. And then the columns and the rows inside our sheet is not zero-based index. Remember, in an array, our first element, that initial element, starts at 0. Well, in a sheet, it starts at 1. So then we have to add yet another 1 in order to compensate for that. And that is the reason why when we find our row index, or when we find our employee number, we actually have to add 2 in order to get to that. So let's illustrate what happens when we actually remove this, because I want y'all to have a good, solid understanding of why it is that we're adding 2, because this concept actually caused me a lot of heartburn because I could not for the life of me figure out why it wasn't working. So let's delete that 2 and we'll save it. And then let's go back here. We'll share this tab. Now, that was in our update record function. So let's take 34. Since we changed the function, let's refresh it. Make sure that we are working with our right version of our code. So let's retrieve this record. It retrieved fine. Now let's change this. Let's just add, I don't know, let's give this person a substantial raise. And then we will update test as the note. So now remember, we're not actually compensating for this header row, nor are we compensating for the 0 index. So now when we go down here and hit update record and then process, let's see what happens and then figure it out. So you'll notice that our 34 row didn't change. What happened was is it came up here and changed this record. It was off. And if you look at that, 1, 2. So it changed this, but we really needed it to change 1, 2. Now let's look at the archive, because the archive didn't come up and grab, the correct one. What it did was it came up and grabbed the one that was 2 above it. So when we go back here and hit back, you'll see that it grabbed 1, 2. It's 2 off. So what we need to do is we need to ensure that we compensate for that by adding 2. Now when we go back and refresh it, and we'll do the same exact one, 34. First we will retrieve it, and then we'll change it. We'll update the record, if I can spell it correctly. Go down here to our action, hit update, and then we'll process that. You'll see that it is now changing the correct row. And when we go to our archive, it is now archiving the correct row. So that is the purpose for that. That is the purpose for that additional 2 being added on to the employee index, because we want to correct the fact that the header row is there and that the sheet is not 0 based, but 1 based. So that's what that is. Now back to our delete record or archive, because we're going to change that since we're not really deleting it. We can use a lot of this data, which means that we can also use a lot of the same code inside of our update info. But first, let's go up here. And if you remember, this is our condition statement. This is what happens when we push the button and that select box is actually selected. Let's change this first. Instead of delete, we'll change this to archive. And since we're changing the value, we have to come down here and ensure that it's pulling that correct value. So this is archive. And we don't want to give an alert. What we want to do is run the code. So let's call that function archive info. That'll work. Now we need to create this function. So go down here all the way to the very bottom, and we will create that function. Now let's first make sure this function is being called, and we'll do a simple alert. I am the archive info function. Wow, I cannot spell today. Sorry about that. And I was called. So now let's go back to our sheet and test this out just to make sure that our function is being called and connected correctly. So go down here, archive record, hit process. I am the archive record info function, and I was called. Yep, perfect. So our functions are connected. Now what we need to do is we need to initially grab our employee number. So this field right here. So we'll go back and we already have that declared in a variable. And then we're also going to need to pull, it's just a good idea to pull all this information so we can retrieve it to make sure that is the correct record that we're looking at. Because oftentimes people don't think of employees as numbers, although I know HR is accused of that a lot, but really we're looking at, okay, it's the number, but who is it? And do we have the right employee? Because we don't want to archive a record for an active employee. So let's just go ahead and copy all of this. Come down here, put that in here. And then let's see if we need anything else here. We are going to need the current date because if we look at our employee data, we do have the username and we do have a date, an entry date. Now, we don't want to just archive this record with the username or the entry date that's already there. We want to collect the entry date for the action that is archiving, for the archive action date, as well as who did the archiving. So we are going to need that still. So we'll go in here and we'll snag this. And then we're also going to need this new data variable. Now remember, this variable here is attached to that function. So we can use the same terminology if we want. And let's go ahead and do that just for the sake of simplicity. So we're going to need this new data, and that data is going to be equal to this variable. And we'll go ahead and keep that retrieve employee number. Although we could use this imp number, but this imp number is used inside of our array. And to keep things separate and clear, just so y'all can see what's going on, we can keep another variable. So we can have a variable equal to the same thing. Two different variables, equal to the same thing. Now, when I get done with the functionality, since we're creating a CRUD, once I get done with this archive or delete function, I'll go through all of my code. It's just a habit that I have. I'll go through every bit of my code and consolidate and condense things that can be condensed and get rid of things that are extra like this. That way I can clean up my code, make it a lot smaller, because you'll find that when you create something, you want to add more functionality to it. And we're going to do that with our UI. We are going to add a calculator of sorts, probably a way to really do analysis, say a salary analysis or whatnot. So we're going to add more functionality, and the less code we have doing the same exact thing efficiently, the better. Because then, as you can see, we're already at line 200, and that is just our HTML. So then we're also going to need this Google script run. And this Google script run is going to pass this retrieve employee number and our new data array as arguments. Give ourselves a little bit of a separation there. Now, instead of this update record, because this is the function on our server side or our Google Apps Script side, we don't want to have it run the update record. We want to have it run our archive record. So we'll need to create that. And then what we're also going to need to do is we're going to need to clear all of that data again, just so it's not hanging out. Okay, so that looks good. That looks like it is our archive info function. Good. So now let's save our HTML side, and then let's go back to our There we go. Let's go back to our server side, our Google App side, and create that function. So our function was archive record, and it's receiving this retired imp number and new data. Now we can reuse this because remember, it's the data that's coming over, and we are simply assigning a term or a name for our data. And we are using that. In this case, we're just using whatever it was called in the HTML. So we have that. Now for this function, we're going to do essentially do the same thing as our update record. So what we can do is we can go down and copy all this, and then we can go through this code and tailor it to what it is that we want it to do. So we want this archive sheet. Now this archive sheet, if you remember, this SS and this sheet variable is a global variable up here. And what we can do while we're at it, and we're just getting ready to clean it, let's go ahead and move this up here and make this a global variable as well. And then we can get rid of our update. We can get rid of that variable in our update as well, since it's there. Archive sheet, we won't need this in our update one because we just made it global. And we can go through and make quite a bit of things. We can actually do this employee data as well, but we can do that when we clean up. So in our archive record function, we're wanting to get our employee data variable and set that equal to the whole value of our data sheet. So really all this. So we want to keep that. And then we want to let our employee number, we want to take that and map it, which extracts only the second index, which our second index, if you remember right, is our employee numbers. So this is extracting the employee numbers from that 2D array and making it into a 1D array. So we want to keep that. And then we're setting this employee number index to that employee number and the index of whatever it is that we're passing. So we're taking this retrieve employee number, this variable right here, that's coming over from our HTML side, whatever number it is, 34, 25, whatever. And then it's searching through this variable, which is our sheet, our one-dimensional array that only contains those employee numbers. And then it's running the index of that. And if it finds it, it's going to give us a -1. If it doesn't find it, or if it doesn't find it, it's going to give us a -1. If it finds it, it's just going to simply return the position of that array. So now we do still need our user email because we want to get the actual ID of the person that's running this function. And if you'll notice, we did a new data unshift. Now this unshift actually creates a new index 0 with this variable. So it takes this user email, which is our active user email, and then it places it at the beginning of the array called new data. So I actually want to pause here and explain this unshift and how we work with arrays. It won't take long. So let's create another function here, just so we can see how we can manipulate data within an array. So we'll do array teach. And now let's go up and grab an array. We have an array built in here. I think it was like lemon cars. Yep, here we go. So we'll grab this array. And then let's log this array real quick. Lemon cars. We'll save this, and then we'll select that rteach. When we run this, you'll see that it is in a one-dimensional array. It's a single level array. Now what we did up here is we unshifted it. So what unshifted does is it takes a value, whatever we give it, and places it up here in the 0 index. It creates a new index. So let's do lemon cars dot unshift, and let's put gremlin, because that was a doozy of a car. Let's put lemon in there, and then let's run this array again. What we are essentially doing is adjusting, we are transforming this array and adding this. So let's log that out. Log, and now we'll log lemon cars and see how we changed it. So now we run it. And as you can see, this is our initial array. And then we run that unshift, and this is what happens to that array. Now, what we can also do is what's called pop. So let's create another variable. Let's just say we'll just use pop. Let pop equal lemon cars dot pop. And what pop does is, oh good, it actually pulls it up here. It removes the last element from an array and returns it. So then what we can do is logger log, and then let's just log out pop and then see what we got. Now when we run it, you'll see that this is our initial array. Then we run that unshift by putting gremlins in the 0 index, which transforms the array. And then our pop goes to the very end and pulls it. So now the other thing that I wanted to show you, and there's a couple other things that we can do with arrays that I'm not going to get into, like slice. Slice can get pretty confusing and be its own video itself. But the last one I want to show you is push. So now what push does is it takes whatever's inside our parentheses here and puts it to the end of the array. So just like unshift places it at the very beginning, push pushes it at the very end. So let's just do eagle. Although that was not a lemon car, that was a pretty cool car. We're just going to do it. And then we will log the lemon cars again, and you can see how it's been transformed. So we'll run this. Our first array, this is us unshifting it with gremlin, putting it in here. This is pop getting the very last one. And then this is adding eagle to the end. Because you can see the order of operations. We started with this array. Then we unshifted by placing another element in front at the 0 index, which changed the array. It updated the array. Then we just simply grabbed the last element with pop. But then we took the updated array, because nothing went away from this array, we transformed it. And then we added eagle at the end. So that is a good reference to have when you're dealing with array. And I'll comment this out so it'll still stay in here. And you'll notice that I used /*. You could go through and do every single line, but if you have multiple lines, you can do this to take care of multiple lines. So now that we kind of have an understanding of how to change arrays or transform arrays, we were taking this user email, unshifting it, and transforming our new data array that was coming from our HTML side and putting the user email in front of it. When we go back here to our sheet and we think about what we're going to want to have happen once that record goes over here. What we could do is we could just write a policy or an SOP and say anytime that you delete a record, you've got to place something in here in notes. Now, if you're dealing with somewhat of a large team, adding in an extra step like this leaves it open for someone not doing it or data integrity to kind of be missed because maybe some people will just miss this step or whatnot. So what we can do is we could take our array and add something to the very end of this. Because remember, when it comes over here, over to our archive record, it's not coming over a certain amount of columns. It's actually coming over by our length. Whatever length of our array is how far it's going to go over. So what we can do is we can create another variable, and let's just call this separation. Because if we think about an archive, anytime we archive a record that we won't need anymore in our current database, generally, more often than not, the reason is because the person's separated. Now, we can do this an additional way by building in, say, another form that the user would go through and select the reason for the action, and we may do that in the future. But for now, let's just push this to our array. So separation is actually going to be, let's just set it to a string right now. And what we want to do first is put this user email in front. And then we want to take that new array after it's been changed and then push the value of separation. So what that'll do is that'll now give us a new array. Initially, it will place our user email variable in the front, and then it will take that transformed array and then add separation at the end of it. So good, perfect. So now when we think about what we want to have happen, we want our data to find the coordinating row. And then instead of just grabbing this and archiving it, what we want to do is actually update it with a couple new pieces. And then the couple new pieces is the username of doing the archive action, as well as the archive action date. So before it goes over to the archive, we need to update this row. So to do that, we'll go over here and we can do that inside our if. So if it's greater than -1, what we want to do is keep this, but before we archive, we want to run this piece. Because remember, functions are pretty top to bottom linear. It is going to go in order. So it's going to run line 93 before line 94. So since we want to essentially overwrite that row before we archive it, just to pick up that the not only the username and the date, but also add that separation at the back end. And then once it gets done overwriting that, then we want it to archive. Now, after it archives, what we want to do is delete the thing. So we don't want to delete it from our archive. We don't want to delete it after we send it over here from the archive sheet. We want to delete it from this sheet. And we want to delete the row that the index was located at. So what I mean is Instead of this, we're not setting the value and we're not really caring what this new data length is, row index. What we're wanting to do, we don't need to get the range. What we need to do is we need to go to the sheet, which is our employee data sheet. And then what we want to do is delete our row. And this is a method, and this method is going to receive whatever row it is. Now, if we wanted to delete the fifth row, we would simply just put 5 in there and, go with it. But our row changes. The number of the row changes depending on that employee index, that employee number. Now, we already have what row we're located at, what row that data is at, saved in a variable. And that variable is this row index. So instead of passing a number here, we can pass the row index because the row index is the number that we are currently on. So what will happen is it will receive all of this data in the form of an array here in new data. And then when it gets that, we are going to take our user email, put it in the very beginning, and then we were going to add this text right here, which is in the form of which is saved here in this array. And we're going to pass that text to the very end of our array. And then we're going to put that array and we're going to set values to the row that we are focused on, which is our row index. And then after we pass that, after we overwrite that, then we're going to archive it, essentially copy and archive. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our sheet and then delete the row that is located at the row index. So let's try this out. So if we did everything correctly after we save it, we can go in here and refresh our user interface. And let's pick a person to terminate. So we just gave this person $156,000. So this person's, having some serious budget and we don't even know who this person is. So let's just delete this record. So as you can see, this is 12.6. This is Prairie-HR-Solutions. So what we want to do is isolate this. So first, let's go in here, grab 34, and we want to retrieve that. We'll process it. Okay, so we have the correct data, and instead of updating the record, we want to archive record. And now when we go down here, we should run that function, which will update this, and then send it over to archive, and then come back here and delete it. So let's see what happens. We'll process. As you can see, 34 went away. It cleared it, so that's good. So now let's go make sure that it got archived. And it came over here and it did get archived. So good. Good. The one thing that it didn't pull over here was our record. And I believe the reason why it didn't was because it did not pull this over. Okay, well, that's fine. We can work on that a little bit later. But technically, our functionality works and is correct. So good. So now we have essentially an operational create, retrieve, update, and record, or update and archive function in the form of a user interface. So let's go over real quick and figure out why separation wasn't picked up. So separation here, oh, I see what we did. So the reason why separation is not getting picked up is because unshift, I don't want to use the terminology, but essentially what unshift is doing, it is unshift itself transforms a array. What push does, push just simply adds something to the end. So we could transform, we can mutate an array without putting it in a variable. This here, this piece right here, would need to be inside of a variable. That variable can then be passed down here. So instead of doing that, let's just delete this, because what we'll do is we will take, nope, we need to leave the unshift. We'll handle this a different way just so we don't have to go through the code and create another variable and then go down here and change all this. We'll handle separation a different way when we start building out and enhancing our form over there. So now I want to end our video here because now we have a fully functioning CRUD interface. And our next video, what I would like to do is when we go in here, you'll notice that we are pulling up alerts. And when we pull, well, you see these alerts coming up. When we pull up these alerts, you'll notice that alert, let me find one here with an alert. I believe it was, let's do 87. And then that will pull up that'll pull up an alert once we update something, and we'll give this guy a good raise, just John Smith person. And now when we update this alert right here. So this alert, as you can see, it's kind of gross looking up here at top, an embedded page at, and then whatever this is, script Google user content. So this isn't really, I mean, it's really not professional and it doesn't look nice. So instead of doing just a simple alert, what I would like to do is a prompt over here. And instead of having, because if you remember right, our code passes not found if the employee isn't found. And you can see that this is, it comes in as unavailable. And I want that unavailable to populate in a field instead of this not found. Because what it's doing is it's taking not found and it's breaking it up by its index. So N is 0, O is 1, T is 2, and then the space, obviously. And then, as you can see, it's breaking up the letters. So instead of doing that, I would like to focus our next video on really enhancing the way our user interface communicates with our user. And we'll do that through prompts. And what we also will do is take this piece and place this in a prompt that automatically populates once it's open. And then this person can read it and click out of it. So that's what we'll focus on our next video. And if you like what we're doing, please hit that subscribe button and we'll continue to bring you content. And until next time, please take care.